Many Christians in the U.S. got actively involved to influence the presidential election to get a government elected that would uphold biblical principles. However, today's guest suggests that unless something changes in the way young people view the world, future elections might not produce a very godly government. We're joined by Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries, based out of Colorado, and author of Unanswered Questions, available at summit.org. Jeff Myers, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Yeah, glad to be with you.
All right. So, Dr. Myers, can you first of all just tell us a little bit about yourself and your ministry, maybe your background?
You bet. Summit Ministries is a training program for young adults that equips them, a rising generation, to embrace God's truth and to champion a biblical worldview. Those are that's the heart of what we do. So we are wanting to train leaders for our nation who think biblically. The program has been in existence for 58 years. I've had the privilege to be the president for 9 years. I attended as a student way back in the day when I was considering graduating high school and considering leaving the church. Came to a Summit Ministries 2-week long training program. Founder David Noble. I said to him, "I hope you have a lot of answers, but I have a lot of questions." I was so arrogant, and he said to me, "At Summit, we aren't afraid of questions." And I realized I was in the community of people where I could really ask the tough questions about my faith and about the world and everything else. For the first time, I felt like I found a place as a Christian in our age.
Okay, so that's amazing. Now, you spend a lot of time mentoring youth and training up youth leaders, but you say that there's not much of a difference right now between the way young adults who are in the church think about the world compared to young adults who aren't in the church. So, can you give us maybe some examples of this?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. I have the privilege to work with about 40,000 young people here. These are pretty intensive programs, so it's a lot of mentoring. A few years ago, I began that young adults in the church and young adults outside of the church were very little different. So, for instance, 69% of church-going young adults today say they believe there are no absolute truths, that they are the ones who decide for themselves what is right and what is wrong. Then another thing began to emerge when socialism began to really reemerge as a force in our nation. So many young adults were telling me, "Oh, yeah, I think it's a great idea. I really love it." And we did some studies on this and found that young adults are 5 times as likely to have a Marxist worldview as their older counterparts in church. So, in both social areas, they and political and economic areas, they have decided I am the one who decides what's right and wrong. I'm the one who decides what is true, right? So you take those things and put them together, and you end up in some really weird conversations. I would have a conversation with someone and I would say, "Well, that's not what socialism is. Look at all the failures." And they say, "But I'm the one who decides what is true for me. And so I know what I want socialism to be. Therefore, that's what it is."
Interesting. So you're saying that socialism is becoming kind of more of a view of the young people. So far left socialism used to be frowned upon by the average American. So what's changed and why? Is it just kind of that viewpoint of the younger generation, do you think?
I think it is. The younger generation didn't have the experience that I had growing up. Now, if you go back in American history to the 1920s and 1930s, socialism was very popular. Even far left radical socialism was very popular. Fascism became popular in the United States of America. Adolf Hitler had his admirers here, even people who were working in the presidential administration, because they thought that guy knows how to get things done, right? So what happened after World War II is the rise of international communism. And in China and in the Soviet Union and in other places, there was wholesale slaughter of people to the point where one scholar said possibly up to 360 million people have been killed at the hands of their own government in the 20th century. 360 million people. It's wholesale slaughter in the 20th century. I saw that, right? So I remember being in high school and seeing videos of parades of military equipment and realizing the Soviet Union has enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world 15 times over. None of the young adults I'm working with have ever had that experience. As far as they know, socialism is just what, respectable countries in Scandinavia do. And so it's really no problem at all. We should have more of that here. They don't see the tie in between the Marxist ideology and the socialist mindset.
Interesting. So, is there any way that, like, do you think that almost the definition of socialism could change just based on the new world viewpoint of it? Is that a
Well,
possibility?
keep in mind, you've got an entire generation of young people who think that whatever they want to have happen is what is true. So they don't believe that Bernie Sanders is a person who does whatever he does. He's whatever they want him to, based on how they feel about themselves. So they don't. So I think the problem with the socialist worldview is that it's based on Marxism, which is based on materialism. Only the material world exists. There's no heaven, there's no hell, there's no God, no Jesus, no Holy Spirit, nothing outside of the material world. It's the physical world. You have trees, then you have wealth. You have mines, then you have wealth. And if there's only so much to go around and one person has more, that means they stole it. So it's not wrong to take it back from them because they stole it in the first place. What the young adults I'm working with today have completely missed is that wealth grows through good ideas, through innovation, through inspiration. So a lot of what we do at Summit Ministries is not just trying to say, hey, you believe this about socialism, that's bad. We say, here is what a mindset based on scripture could lead us to. Great ideas, innovation, inspiration, opportunities to overcome problems, not just by redistributing wealth, but by changing everything in the way we operate based on a biblical worldview. We try to give them that vision.
Where are today's youth getting these ideas from?
Mostly social media, mostly social. And I know this because this last summer we did our programs virtually. We did a lot of polls. So I have polls from hundreds and hundreds of students, and I asked them, where do you think most people get their ideas? And about 65 or so percent say people get their ideas from social media. 1% get their ideas from church. 1%. So next to social media, it's friends. Next to friends, it's family or the news, something like that. But the church has almost no influence on these young adults, and these are mostly Christian young adults we're talking about.
And are they not learning the proper history in school?
I don't think I guarantee you they're not getting a proper history in school because I have reviewed all of the textbooks, and it's woefully inadequate in
Wow.
explaining anything from the standpoint of reality, not necessarily from a biblical view, but just what is real. How do we know? I mean, how could somebody look at a country like the Soviet Union and say, "Oh, I guess Marxism's really not that bad"? But how could they look at China or Venezuela even and say, "Oh, it's not really that bad"? I mean, you have to have decided ahead of time that you're going to be a deceiver when you write that textbook in order to come up with the kinds of things that people have come up with and are.
Wow. Okay, so you mentioned before that statistics show that 69% of evangelical youth who attend church don't believe in absolute truth, right? And you agree that if you're so these young people are believing now that if their beliefs offend someone, then their beliefs might be wrong, right? So why do you think that absolute truth matters?
I think absolute truth matters in the world of ideas in the same way that gravity matters in the world of physics. You have to take it into account. I just love seeing the picture of that water tower grill. I want to go there and eat sometime. But if I decided I'm going to stand up on that thing and I'm going to jump off, I'm going to just jump off of the edge. The law of gravity says that I will go down, not up. Even if I feel like I want to go up, I'm going to go down, not up. You don't you don't break the law of gravity, you just prove the law of gravity, right? In the same way, the idea of a moral absolute truth is that truth does exist. Justice is a real thing. It's not just something that is a concept that I can have if I can make myself more powerful. That love is a real thing, that the kingdom of God exists, that spiritual realities are just as real as physical realities. That's at the heart of a biblical worldview. It's also at the heart of a generally philosophical worldview. I did a doctorate in philosophy. That was my academic training. And philosophers all get this, but very few other people do. So absolutely recognize that there is truth and you are not it, is at the heart of living a good life.
Okay. And you were saying that apparently only 19% of church going, born again Christians have that biblical worldview. So, how would you define a biblical worldview?
Well, a biblical worldview is a pattern of ideas that starts with God exists. Because God exists, we can know what is real. Because we can know what is real, we can know what is right and what is wrong. Because we can know what is right and what is wrong, we can know how to form a flourishing society. We can know how to be mentally healthy, so forth. And it applies to every area of life. It starts with Jesus Christ. That Jesus is at the center of it all, and everything else, as John Stott said, is circumference. When you start with that Jesus is at the heart of it, Jesus was the creator of the world. You actually, even though you're starting off with things that people say, that's just so crazy, you're talking about miracles and all of that. But if you start off with that, you end up with a view of the world that is more reasonable, rational, intelligent, and true than if you take a worldview based on, say, secular or materialist assumptions. That's how I define it.
And then what about unbiblical views? Can those be turned around?
I think unbiblical views can be turned around if we recognize what they are. So, for instance, a worldview that's very influential in my country and in yours is the worldview of secularism. Secularism essentially says, look, there may be a God, probably not. People who believe in him are crazy, but they have the freedom to do it. But even if God does exist, he's not relevant to anything else that is important. It's not relevant to how we live our lives, not relevant to our culture, programs we produce on television, governments that we have at the local, provincial, federal level, or whatever else. God is not relevant. So a lot of believers embrace that worldview implicitly, say, oh, sure, well, yeah, I believe in God and I have an experience with him every Sunday morning, but that doesn't affect anything else. That mindset has got to shift. We realize that God is not just something that we add on to our lives, that if what he says in the Bible is true, then it becomes the basis for everything else.
Hmm. Now, you'd mentioned that culture is influencing our youth today. So, what advice do you have for parents?
Mm. My main advice for parents is you want to be sure you're helping your children get a training in the world. You should assume that they have questions that they have not found good answers to about their faith. How do we know there really is a God? How do we know that the world is created rather than it just evolved through random chance processes? How do we know that Jesus really did rise from the dead? How could there be a good God if there is evil in the world? Every young adult I know is asking those kinds of questions. And if they aren't getting answers in church, then they're going to assume it's because the church doesn't have the answers. You've got to train them in a biblical worldview. We can help. Summit Ministries, summit.org. There are a lot of other organizations too that will help you. Apologetics and worldview training are a big part of. There's a lot of programming on the internet. There are a lot of ways that you can get that training for your kids, but I believe it's absolutely vital today.
Yeah. So, what would you say to parents who have teens who are simply not interested in what the parents have to say? Not interested in listening to them, what they're trying to teach them.
Oh, but that doesn't actually happen. Just sorry. Uh, yeah. So what do you do if your children are not interested? I think you have the conversation with them that you would have if you were trying to get them to say stop using drugs and say in your current situation you may not see everything that you need to see for the future of your life. I want to be walking alongside of you, helping you. I need you to trust me that this is something we need to do. So many parents will tell me I sent my child to a Summit Ministries program for 2 weeks. They did not want to go. 2 or 3 days later, they called and said, "This is the best thing that's ever happened to me. Thank you." At this point, you have to learn to be a parent because your children have friends and their friends may not be leading them in the right direction. Just having you as their friend is not enough. You've got to be the one to say, look, I can see farther down the road because I've been there through my own mistakes and through things that I did right. And I need to give you this direction.
Right. So it does become, it's very important for parents to know who their children are befriending and perhaps even intervene, right? If to discourage them from befriending them. So how do you do that? Especially for the
Well,
older kids.
I think for the older kids, I continue. I continued to try to find new friend groups for my kids. So I'd get them involved in different activities. We'd get together with those families, part of it. If I noticed there was a child at school that my son was a friend with, then I would get to know that family and have them over and do different things. So it's all part of building the community. When friends go bad, it's because our children are developing friendships that are outside of any kind of a positive community. We have to be the ones to create that. You can't just assume that the person who lives down the block, because it's a nice little neighborhood, also has the same values that you have. You've got to get to know them and have those discussions and talk. Essentially, you're discipling other people, even as you're discipling those who influence your children.
Yeah. Well, well, Dr. Jeff Myers, it looks like we are running out of time here, but Dr. Jeff Myers, president of Summit Ministries based out of Colorado and author of Unquestioned Answers. You can find that at summit.org along with many other resources, as you were saying, right? Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely happy to do it.